I do think that cryptocurrency or blockchain or Bitcoin to an extent has given more power to individuals and less to the government. I think we're definitely building, and I think we're at really the start of a major turning point for the industry. And so Africa, South America, Central America, they're really high in terms of adoption and growth rates.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Horizon series by BeInCrypto. I'm Genesis Hernandez from BeInCrypto's marketing team, and I will be your host for today's episode. This show is all about asking the big questions. Where we're headed, what does the future of money look like, and today we're zeroing into one of the biggest pieces of that puzzle, Bitcoin. We're asking, what could Bitcoin look like in 2040? Not just price speculation, but real structural impact. How it might evolve, what role it will play in our economies, and how it might shape the future around us. And to dig in all that, I'm joined by Tristan Dickinson. He's the Chief Marketing Officer of ExSat, a really innovative scaling solution working to make Bitcoin more accessible, resilient, and a lot more powerful than more people realize. Tristan, thank you so much for coming, and please can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. I'm Tristan Dickinson, the CMO of ExSat Network. Now, what is ExSat? It's a Bitcoin scaling solution. And really what we're trying to do is transform Bitcoin from what it's really good at, which is a store of value, into a dynamic yield-bearing asset.
Amazing. And I want to ask you, maybe people that are seeing us, they want to know how you got involved into the Bitcoin world.
Yeah, so I got involved in crypto in about 2016. I actually worked at a bank at the time in Australia. I am Australian. We mentioned before that I live in Europe now, but I am Australian. And a friend of mine just happened to work in a similar, didn't work at the bank, but he worked in a similar building. We would have lunch and he'd tell me about, this thing called Bitcoin that's going to kind of revolutionize or change the face of, global finance or global markets. Thought, okay, sounds interesting. Why are you into it? Because it can make money. Okay, let's have a conversation. And then I really dug into it. I dug into it from a personal point of view, started to understand a lot more about blockchain, about Bitcoin itself, trialed the network, had made a few mistakes, like everyone, has made mistakes in the past as well. And then that really evolved into working full time. So it was a passion of mine for a while. And then the last kind of 3 to 4 years, I've worked full time in the space, and it's been really interesting.
Yeah, well, that's such a cool path. Actually, yeah, same thing. I think like a lot of people, maybe they started nowadays. I think like maybe more people started with gaming or fashion. Like there's not just about money, but I feel like all is cool. We definitely started doing trading or checking prices and everything. It's still like maybe crypto is like 90% finance, and yeah, there are other applications definitely, but yeah. I totally understand you that maybe try to, check prices and everything. So everyone, I feel like everyone in this space seems to have just one turning point to where everything, we all just click, right? So I want to ask you, like, how do you see the Bitcoin ecosystem right now? Are we still like in the building phase, or you think something bigger is about to start to shift? So with my question is like, maybe you can tell us like a little bit of what ExSat is doing also in the Bitcoin ecosystem, and yeah, what you're thinking about, like if we are building or there is something bigger right now.
I think we're definitely building, and I think we're at really the start of a major turning point for the industry. I think if you had said to me that the US government would be pro crypto 1 year, 2 year, 4 years, or 2016, I would have probably laughed. So that's a bit of a pipe dream, maybe one day, but it's not going to happen necessarily as fast as it has. It's good that they're pro-crypto. Let's wait to see if there's some stability in terms of not just executive orders, but actual bills. But I really think we're at a turning point. But very much also at a building phase. So Bitcoin is traditionally, and its main use case was as a store of value, and it's fulfilled that use case, right? It's done a fantastic job. And that's why it's able to be adopted as a digital reserve asset. and you need stability, and you really need, the comparisons with gold, I think, are quite easy in the sense of it's more of a stable environment, but it's very effective in terms of a store of value. But I think what we've really seen over the past couple of years, particularly in the past 2 years, is, this proliferation of Bitcoin layer twos and starting to turn something that is a store of value and starting to create value out of it. And that's really where I think the industry at large, or Bitcoin, is really evolving towards. It's really moving away, not just from that digital gold narrative, into something that, is similar to DeFi. And that's where the rise of Bitcoin DeFi can really start to become something that's more practical right now. So I think we're at this inflection point of not only global adoption in terms of the notoriety that cryptocurrency and Bitcoin is achieving, right? If you discuss or have an executive order from the US that Bitcoin will be a strategic reserve, that's going to increase adoption, or at least awareness of our industry at large. But I think we're heavily in a building phase. I think there's a lot going on in all ecosystems, but particularly in the Bitcoin ecosystem. And I think it's a really exciting time to really be a part of both the Bitcoin ecosystem, but the broader ecosystem as well.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. I feel like there is so much potential, but still a lot to figure out. So that's what I'm saying. Like, we're still building. So I want to just make this transition to like maybe thinking about 2040. If we're looking ahead to 2040, where do you think this all goes? Do you think like Bitcoin actually could become a global currency that people can use day to day, or maybe just like a digital gold or store value? I feel like with all this, I don't know if it's speculation, but maybe when we got the news and say, yeah, Trump bought like millions of dollars with Bitcoin, some people think like, hey, maybe this could become a global currency, or that changes the charts a lot. But I feel like there are a lot of assets, right, to talk about that. What could become a global currency? So this question focuses on like, maybe what do you think about that? Or maybe it could be a store of value, a hash, something to protect against the system. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think as a store of value, it's kind of there. It hasn't achieved in terms of the widespread nature of gold and really being used in forms of monetary policy, but it will get there, right? El Salvador took a stance. To an extent now the US follows. There's a saying, if the US sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. And I think that's pretty true. So I do think it's evolving towards value creation. It's also one of the deepest asset classes in terms of liquidity. I think it's worth about a 2 trillion market cap right now. The sovereign wealth funds, public companies, long-term, a lot more as well, not just long-term, but more institutional holders. But it's going to create a lot of value as well. I think a little bit about, the internet in terms of TCP IP, that layer, it really, nobody uses it directly, but it powers everything above it. And Bitcoin by its nature, it is permissionless, it's open source. It can really be kind of the bedrock for different layers of financial innovation. And what I do think, taking a step into the future, as you mentioned, is it'll really underpin decentralized financial ecosystems. Now we're at a little bit in the AI age, maybe machine-to-machine economies, digitally traded native networks. But I don't think it's going to replace fiat. If you think about kind of one of the first use cases in terms of practicality is being able to use Bitcoin to pay for something. If you go to the grocery store, do you really want something that costs $5 for you to have $5, but potentially by the time you get to the checkout, you've got $4.50 because the price has changed. Or potentially, the inverse, you've got $6.50. That instability in terms of price is a challenge for people to use it as an everyday payment method. So I'm not sure that it's going to take over from that point of view, but it could really function as global collateral. Like I mentioned before, gold kind of sits behind monetary systems, and Bitcoin has the same potential, but it's a lot more programmable and dynamic. So I think it's an exciting time. But it's also, we need to consistently keep zooming out on our industry. It's a powerful time right now for crypto and Bitcoin specifically, but compared to the larger markets, right, we are still very nascent. We're still very early. The global currency market is enormous. I don't think it's necessarily going to replace that, but I think it's going to be in addition, and help to solve some use cases that really need to be solved.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when you brought that supermarket example, like, I don't know if people want to buy something with like, okay, a kilo of potatoes is like 0.00018
Totally.
Bitcoin. Like, yeah, how can I do that fast math? Even with, not, I mean, regular currency, like thinking about, okay, rupees or dollars, okay, it has more stability, but maybe, I don't know, this like, or pesos, or pesos, like they say like, okay, 1,000 something pesos, and it's just 1 kilo of potatoes. So it's like, it's still, it's
Exactly.
kind of, yeah, it's kind of like difficult. So yeah, I understand that. And I want to talk about wealth inequality, because that's maybe how some people try to get into crypto, so like they think like maybe they could get richer, or especially those who got in early. So um what's your take, or what do you think about, like, in 2040, like Bitcoin will help close this wealth gap, or it make it worse?
It's a good question, and I think the answer changes and bounces around a little bit. So I think if you look at the kind of early stages of Bitcoin, to an extent, what I think it did really well was democratize financial access. You didn't have to be wealthy, you didn't have to be a millionaire, you didn't have to live in certain countries. You just, needed to have access to the internet, and then be able to understand, what a cold or hot wallet was, and, maybe have an understanding of how to purchase from an exchange. So I think it turned a lot of people that might not have been wealthy into quite wealthy people, right? It really democratized that access. Going back to the example of I worked for a bank, within all banks there's a wealth arm, and typically the wealth arm, individuals might need to have X amount of dollars. Let's say it's $1 million. And then you get access to a bunch of different services and tactics that can turn that 1 million potentially into 2 million. Now, for 99.9% of the world, that's a high barrier to entry. It really reduced that. It really enabled people to get in with not that much money, whether it's a few dollars, $100, $1,000, and then turn that into quite a lot of money. So I think it did a good job in terms of democratizing, the ability for people to not have a lot and then make some. And then it goes through different waves, right? So what we're seeing now is a lot of institutional adoption, and I think that's really positive in terms of ETFs, right? That's really spurned the market. That gave us a bit of a bump to the normal 4-year cycles, pre-halving hitting all-time highs. Institutions are a little bit of a double-edged sword. I think they're great in many elements. They're particularly great for our industry, which is still very nascent. But if you look at the traditional markets, institutions has really taken a stranglehold. So it's difficult, you can do it, but it's difficult in stocks to turn a little bit into a lot. And we're already at this inflection point where institutions are now very involved, or have been for a bit, but they're now more openly involved by ETFs. That is starting to change some of the dynamics, that could bring rise to some wealth inequality. And maybe it has. Maybe that's why meme coins have gone so crazy, particularly over the last 6 to 8 months, because you don't need a lot and you can make a lot. But I think ultimately it does definitely empower a lot of people to save, to transact in a system that doesn't already or naturally favor wealthy people. The original thesis was to create a decentralized network that's permissionless and open source and accessible by all. And typically by financial markets' global nature, it's not accessible by all. It's not available to everyone. It's available to a few. Inequality is not going to vanish. That's just the way that the world runs. I think it's always run like that. But it definitely reduces some of the kind of systemic unfairness that I think we've seen be really built into traditional or fiat-based systems.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that's actually such a fair point. Yeah, sometimes I feel like that's how the world works, and it's not just maybe crypto's labor like to change that. There are like more agents around that. So now that I'm talking about like we talk about wealth, and now of course it's, I mean, crypto or Bitcoin is changing a lot of things around the world. I want to talk something about, I mean, that also changed from one day to another a lot of people's lives. It's about AI. AI has been helping us in like daily life, like finance or decision making, even governance in some ways. And now I feel like we started to see those intersections between AI and blockchain. So, how do you think that's going to influence Bitcoin's journey? Um, to be more specifically, it could be like, can Bitcoin fit into AI-driven economy? What we're heading towards? For example, do you think it can play a native role in a world where machines are transacting on their own?
I think Bitcoin plays a really important role. I mean, we're kind of in a space right now where different machines are transacting, they're coordinating, they're really making decisions in real time. But then you come back to it and trust is really a challenge. Like trust is a bottleneck. Not to say that humans are more trustful than technology, because it's probably the inverse. But there is a trust component that's associated, right? So AI agents by nature, they don't have nationalities, they don't have bank accounts, they don't have legal identities. They do operate 24/7. And from that point of view, they require, a financial ecosystem that can match their needs. And I think Bitcoin is kind of uniquely positioned to be able to become, a monetary substrate for AI native, whether it's economies or DAOs or, decentralized autonomous organizations. But why does that matter and why should I care? I think, DAOs are an interesting spotlight into our ecosystem. I think there are benefits to DAOs and there are negatives to DAOs. I think when you work for DAOs, you realize that they're almost similar in a government to an extent. Whilst they are decentralized and autonomous, there is some form of centralization in terms of decision making. But in the future, what are DAOs potentially going to do? And what do they currently do also to an extent? Manage capital, hire contractors, they could execute on strategy, and it's not governed typically by human boardrooms per se, but by the masses, or, better said, by smart contract or by code. So I think I was reading something the other day about DAOs, and there's, I don't know, anywhere from 4,000 to 6,000 DAOs with billions under management, and then what's the natural evolution for DAOs to look at AI agents to perform different functions that they might do. So maybe they research, maybe they want to negotiate deals. A lot of us do this anyway through ChatGPT. If we don't have an answer, we ask ChatGPT for this. Maybe they deploy capital, but really to do these different functions, you have to not have a reliance on banks or necessarily on borders, or you don't necessarily want to have access to permissioned APIs, right? And that's where Bitcoin comes in. It's simple, it's secure, it's unchanging. It doesn't rely on corporate entities, really centralization. And that's really important for AI agents or autonomous organizations to an extent. There are a lot of different elements that are kind of bringing some of these use cases to life. I think a little bit about Lightning Network, it powers microtransactions at scale, and then that can enable, machine to machine payments or different use cases of that nature. So yeah, what you can't really do with fiat or even, most altcoins because of the volatility, there's too much friction or too many challenges. And that's where Bitcoin has that ability to step in. It's the most stable layer from a digital asset point of view. It does provide kind of AI agents or DAOs with the different tools that it might need. But I think really what it's about is settlement. Bitcoin becomes the final arbitrator. It's neutral, it's decentralized, to an extent, it's got a tamper-proof ledger. So yeah, I really think that Bitcoin plays a crucial role for AI agents and also will play an increasing role for DAOs. But we're still in a nascent state. It's still very early, I guess, to predict. But from a kind of needs versus use point of view, Bitcoin is one of the strongest.
Yeah, definitely. I just wanted to make like a little summary of what everything that you said, like thinking about like how something you mentioned, it's not like we trust more in humans than in technology or vice versa, right? So it's not just about the machines, it's about the humans too. And also that's when you start imagining like these autonomous agents making like decisions, handling assets, or even governing systems like the DAOs that you were talking about. And because of one of the core ideas around Bitcoin, that it has always been an individual autonomy, holding our own wealth, being our own bank, and operating outside traditional system. So yeah, I understand the importance, and I feel like a lot of people that read our check our website feel the same as well. So thinking about that, I wanted to come with I think the next question. So if Bitcoin really does enable trust sovereign with wealth, where people can hold more value without intermediaries, what does that mean for governments? Especially, I wanted to focus in more in taxation, control, regulation. How do they respond, or I mean, yeah, what can we expect in the future? I feel like a lot of countries are trying to involve that. I think that last week I just saw that Australia is trying to have crypto as their official cryptocurrency. Maybe I don't know if you could tell us more about it.
How governments are responding is an interesting kind of use case. It's varied, it's changed dramatically across different areas. If you think about a country like Nigeria, they've really cracked down, right? They've kind of taken the stance of, I want to try and ban crypto. What happened? It actually increased the amount of people that used crypto or cryptocurrency to an extent. So I think governments, by and large, and taxation to an extent, it's about control and visibility, right? So governments have been scrambling, I guess you could say, for the past 12 years, but particularly for the past 7 to 8 years, to try and understand, how can we tax this thing? How can we understand this asset class, register this asset class, and then how can we go about and use the same kind of systems that we currently use, which is very much based on businesses, access to bank accounts and complete transparency and visibility, to then tax you. And I think there's been a lot of changes and missteps. Nigeria is an example I gave you where they tried to ban it. It's not sure whether it's highly banned in China or different elements, but China's taken a stance of, almost to an extent, no cryptocurrency. So people that work in the industry, it's very challenging for them. Australia, so I am Australian. Australia will find any way they can to extract tax out of you. The US, there's some high-level discussions. I'm not sure if this has happened or not, about no capital gains. There's discussion across the world about taxing unrealized capital gains for Bitcoin. And I think really what it shows me is that the model globally is very disparate. There are varying levels of degree with which governments understand the digital asset industry, understand blockchain technology, ledger technology, understand this asset class, and how they can extract value, or extract value is probably the wrong word. How can they extract from this asset class, as they do with every other asset class? What are the two rules in life? Death and taxes. A digital asset, and Bitcoin to an extent has kind of circumvented that second rule. So I think it's changing and evolving the industry. I think there's a lot of different approaches that people are taking. I think some of the forward-thinking countries like El Salvador, which recognize it as an asset class, then from a taxation point of view, they're able to understand how to tax this properly. In other countries around the world, people look towards digital assets to kind of get away from hyperinflation. Think about Argentina as an example. You want to move away from a currency that's 200% inflation year on year, and an economy where they'll tax you for anything that they can, towards something which, at least if $1 is here today, that dollar should still be $1 tomorrow. So I think, Nigeria is an example for me. It's a bit of a proof case where, we're starting to see some early tremors of what happens when governments try to overstep or overreach in terms of taxation or banning, and I think something like 40 to 50% of the youth population, I think it's about 40% or so, but they use cryptocurrency against the hedge against the collapse, of the country. And what we're going to see really at large is a lot of new models emerging. Still, they don't quite understand our industry. Still, they don't understand the complexities of it. And in time, they will. And some form of regulatory framework globally will help them. In Europe, as an example, MiCA is that regulatory framework. It's a start. It's not fantastic. It's maybe a little bit over the top. but it does help regulators. It does help when it comes to tax time to understand how you can classify this asset. And then in the future, we might start to see like real-time micro taxes via smart contracts as an example. So you don't have to wait for a full year to go through the different taxation elements. Maybe there's an automated way where they do small amounts of taxation ongoing or in a more streamlined way. There could also be different elements where there's a form of voluntary membership, to different service networks. Maybe DAOs have their own form of social tax. I think, several jurisdictions will offer different benefits. That happens already. If you think about Switzerland, tax rate, depending what canton, you can go from 10 to 25, 30%. I think that'll start to be a big draw card for a lot of people globally. What is the tax rate on crypto? What is the capital gains on crypto? Okay, that's one of the different reasons why I may or may not move my business or myself as a person towards these entities. So I think what you start to see a little bit more, and this is scary for governments, is they don't really understand how to control this. They don't have the visibility that they used to. They don't have a framework that's been in existence for a significant amount of time to understand, how can I tax this class? And that shifts the dynamics a lot more towards individuals. And I think that's a scary power dynamic for governments. But the ones that really embrace that are the ones that are going to, evolve. They're not the ones that resist. And you have seen that, again, to draw that example with El Salvador, people laughed at them in 2022. They embraced Bitcoin strategic reserve. Off the back of that, it actually spurns, well, this is an asset class. How do we tax this asset class? And a lot of different financial instruments. It's not just that it's a Bitcoin digital reserve. It's more the openness towards digital assets. And during the bear market, it was like, that was a smart move, wasn't it? Well done, El Salvador. The asset that you thought was going to go up went down. Now they're laughing. So not only did it change in terms of the monetary side of things, but more important, the everyday life that people have in El Salvador. Crypto is a lot more common. Taxation to an extent is simpler. Being able to use crypto for day-to-day payments is pretty ever present. So yeah, it's a complex discussion. Visibility and control is really what drives governments. But I think over time, and also with some of the different countries or different states or different regions that have really been on the front foot towards whether it's favorable crypto tax or just a clear tax guidance, I think they're really starting to reap the benefits of that. And I think that's only going to increase. We're still a very, very nascent industry. We're still a very young in terms of the majority of the world wouldn't classify, digital assets as an asset class. So things are changing. Taxation is going to evolve and change over time as well. But it does feel a little bit more like the power is with the people just because of the open source permissionless nature, and a little bit less, power to the government.
Yeah. And do you think that we are looking at a fundamental power shift? Something that you mentioned in this conversation was about Argentina. I was living in Argentina in 2019, and I'm not saying a lot of people, but yeah, that's the first time I heard about crypto term, about stable coins and Bitcoin and everything. And then, right now the president is so pro crypto, and I feel like at that moment, maybe like 4 years ago, crypto was the only thing that wasn't fully taken to the government, So, but now you have this president also. Yeah, he promoted, I think, a meme coin, and then they try to blame on him and everything. But they're trying to find a regulation. So, with this question, I'm asking, like, maybe away from governments or individuals, corporations that can totally operate on change, who will hold the power in a Bitcoin enabled world?
I think if you look at history, governments always find a way to hold power. I think anytime there are different elements, nation states, cities, regions that try and move away from the norm, I think they typically fall back in line. I do think that cryptocurrency or blockchain or Bitcoin to an extent has given more power to individuals and less to the government. I think we're also seeing a significant change just at a global level in terms of awareness. If you think about the role that the internet has played, I'm not saying that the majority of states are sheep states, but you typically listen to what you were told 60 to 100 years ago because you didn't know any different. the internet came along, it kind of gave you access to information and gave people to an extent a bit more free will, a bit more like, just because you're doing that doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing. And crypto or Bitcoin to an extent did something kind of similar, where it's like, actually, whether this is right or wrong, you can't see, my cryptocurrency, you can't see my assets. You don't know what a hot or cold wallet, you don't necessarily know what I have or don't have. And that has given me a little bit more power than I might have had before. So I think it definitely gives power back to the people, but governments find a way to get what they want to get eventually. But I do think governments are changing. I think it is becoming a little bit better globally. Better be careful saying globally, because there are many countries that are still in full-on dictatorships where, to do basic things is very difficult. I think it's changed the dynamic towards individuals more. That example you gave of Argentina and Libra, that was a bit of a use case and had a failed to an extent, right? Mm-hmm. You take someone that's very pro crypto, you pair them with people that know what they're doing, know what they want to extract, and then you get a negative outcome. And meme coins, they play their role, definitely. I'm not the biggest fan. I think we're starting to see a divergence away from interest in meme coins. I think I read a stat the other day, something like within 72 hours, 50% of the circulating supply from the team has been sold, right? So people use it as a bit of a pump and dump scheme. And Libra and the president, I forget his name, but he got caught in the middle of that. He wanted to do something. It sounded good to him. He didn't realize the repercussions. So that kind of put the power a little bit towards him as an individual, but then that cascaded down towards problems with the government and became, quite serious. So yes, I think it absolutely gives power back to individuals. But I think if you just look at history to an extent, you can see that governments find a way. But at a global level, I do think governments are maturing. I think it's a lot easier of a society to live in now than it was 100, 200, 3 years ago.
Yeah, so in your view, which regions or maybe countries are most likely to go all in Bitcoin over the next few decades?
In Europe?
All over the world, yeah.
Question, I think some kind of... Maybe my answer is a little bit different now than it would have been 4 months ago. I think 4 months ago, I would have said some of the emerging nations are really going to adopt cryptocurrency, adopt Bitcoin, do things quicker than maybe some of the Western nations might have. So I think a little bit about Africa, South America, Central America, potentially areas of Southeast Asia, etc. They had some they do have some ever-present challenges that cryptocurrency and blockchain technology can help to solve, whether that's connectivity, whether that's, monetary means or both. So I probably would have said 4 months ago that these emerging nations are really going to be the ones that adopt and grow the most in terms of cryptocurrency adoption, but more importantly, probably usage. But it's hard to say what's going to happen after the US has done what they've done. Trump came in office, said he would do a bunch of stuff, and you got to be careful with what any incoming president will say. They'll give 100 promises and follow through with 10. He's followed through with a lot. Created the crypto task force. David Sachs has a good understanding of different elements. An executive order to buy Bitcoin as a digital strategic reserve, and then just have a few different altcoins as kind of secondary options. That's maybe changed some of the dynamics in terms of adoption. The US typically is the innovation capital of the world, right? We see it in almost all other industries, particularly in tech. But we had a government that was, I think it was called Operation Choke Point or something like that. But their goal was cryptocurrency in the US. We need to find a way to kind of stop it or halt it. So emerging nations have the ability to take over in terms of adoption and needs faster than others because there is an appetite and less politics to go through. But with the US doing what they've done, it really opens the way for them to rapidly catch up. Trump makes some pretty big sweeping statements. I think he wants the US to be the mining capital of the world and the innovation capital of the world. And whilst that's something that I kind of look at a little bit with pessimism, saying, okay, let's see how things go. You can't really look at the US and not think that if they do want to change something, they will, because there's been a history of it. So I think Africa is probably going to be one of the fastest growing adopters or users, I guess you could say, of crypto and blockchain. When I was reading about Nigeria specifically the other day, I was, 50%, I think the population under 35 have used or utilized crypto every day. That's significant. Also, the other element about Africa is their population in general. I think it's by 2035 or 2050, which are different dates, but it's going to double within the next 5, 10, 15 years. So the population is going to grow. The median age will be younger. Typically, young people have a higher propensity to take some risk. And so Africa, South America, Central America, they're really high in terms of adoption and growth rates. But the US, based on what they've done, very early days, it's a bunch of talk. Sounds good. Sounds positive. We saw Trump has the ability to cause interest in the market. I think it was a Sunday a couple of weeks ago where he wrote 2 tweets on his Truth platform and the market went crazy. So the US has a chance to really catch up and maybe take over on some of the countries I mentioned.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what Trump says, it's word like when he became elected and this Trump coin, I remember those days, that weekend I couldn't sleep well. And then Melania came. I was like, I was thinking, okay, maybe the dog is going to have their own meme coin as well. So I need to check this. And so I forgot, you mentioned about Central America. I forgot, there is a place called, an island called Prospera, and they're building a lot of things on blockchain as well. So Central America sounds nice too. Cool. Well, this is I really like having this conversation with you. I think it was super insightful. And just before we finish, can you tell us where can people go if they want to follow your work, or maybe also ExSat, please?
Definitely, yeah. So to follow ExSat, it's at ExSat Network on Telegram and Twitter. So it purposely simple. There's a lot of different elements that the network is launching or soon to launch. BTC-Fi is something that we really believe in. It can start with staking, move to restaking, comprehensive yield, and then new form to, collateral and lending. So there's a lot of updates that are coming from the network, and there's a lot of excitement in terms of different partnerships, integrations, or solutions. So definitely follow us. For myself, it's Tristan OX15. And I also work for a layer 1 called Volta, which is a Web3 banking network. So I have a bit of a dual role, and ExSat is really critical in terms of Web3 banking, really providing Bitcoin digital banking services that ladder up to Volta, which is a Web3 banking network. So make sure that you follow ExSat, follow me if you would like to, and really enjoy the conversation and would love to jump on again.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there is so much to unpack when we start thinking about long-term about Bitcoin, not just in tech, but also means for society, for power, for freedom. And I appreciate your time. Thanks for being here again. And thanks to everyone listening. If you got value from this, feel free to share, subscribe, or come up with some ideas on the comments. And we will be back next time with more conversations, and catch you in the next one.
Fantastic. See you later.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Horizon series by BeInCrypto. Today, Tristan helped us rethink what Bitcoin could become beyond just digital gold. From staking and yield to the idea of a long-term security, it's clear that Bitcoin's next chapter is still being written. And whether you're a builder, investor, or just curious, the choices that we make now shape Bitcoin of 2040. Please follow us and stay ahead of the curve, and we will catch you in the next one. Thank you.